He may get another 10 years added to his prison sentence, rather. All that coming now as we learn stunning new developments on the Clinton email matter. New transcripts revealing that former FBI attorney Lisa Page admitted that the FBI considered charging Hillary Clinton, but the Obama Justice Department shut it down. So much more on all that coming up in a moment here inside of America's Newsroom. Meanwhile, the breaking news on the biggest college admissions cheating scandal we have seen to date. We're now learning the actress Lori Loughlin will turn herself into police this morning as we continue to learn more about the scam that helped get children of the rich and famous into elite universities. Busy morning already. It's Wednesday, midweek. I'm Bill Hemring. Good morning. Welcome to New York City. We are back in what we call the shoebox. Just for a day today. Good morning, Sandra.
And good morning to you, Bill. I'm Sandra Smith. Authorities indicting 50 people from parents to administrators and coaches. Actress Felicity Huffman also charged in the scandal as reaction pours in on what authorities are calling Operation Varsity Blues.
We believe all of them, parents, coaches, and facilitators, lied, cheated, and covered up their crimes at the expense of hardworking students and taxpayers everywhere.
To be honest, it's awful. It's sort of a disrespect to my hard work that I put in because, I mean, just because you're rich doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, right?
So Molly Line broke the news yesterday, back on it today, live in Boston today. And Molly, good morning. Let's start with you.
Good morning, Bill. Many of those ensnared in this really massive college admissions scam already made their court appearances. But as you mentioned, one of TV's stars, parents alleged to have used her wealth to buy her child's way into college. Lori Loughlin is expected to be out in court today in L.A. Loughlin, best known for her role in the popular sitcom, had its heydays in the late 80s and early 90s. Full House. Lori Loughlin reportedly flying back from Canada yesterday, expected to face the judge there in L.A. on mail and wire fraud charges. We, of course, will have a crew there at the courthouse. Loughlin's husband, Massimo Giannulli, the fashion designer, made his appearance yesterday. This cheating scam, really broadly, involved parents, scions of industry, CEOs, who paid William Rixinger, 58, the alleged mastermind, a combined total of about $25 million to cheat the system, either through fake test taking and improved scores or faked athletic prowess, the aim to guarantee their child's admission, of course, to these elite schools like Yale, Georgetown, Stanford, and the University of Southern California. Now, USC, important in this case as we're speaking, because that's where Loughlin's and Giannulli's daughters ended up going to school. The couple's youngest daughter, Olivia Jade Giannulli, is a rising social media star. She does some blogging, makeup tutorials, some fashion stuff. This case really drawn a lot of attention. Prior postings made by Olivia Jade facing backlash last year for saying that, she was interested in attending college for the parties. Now, she later backtracked on that, tweeting just last month in part, "I'd way rather be filming 24/7 than sitting in 6 hours of classes straight, but an education is also super important to me, so thank you for your patience and letting me figure out time management." She also said she pursued higher education because of her parents wanted her to head in that direction. Remember, there were two routes that this scam generally took: fake tests or fake sports. According to the court records in this case, Loughlin and Giannulli agreed to pay bribes, totaling some hundreds of thousands of dollars in exchange for having their two daughters designated as recruits for the USC crew team, even though they did not participate in crew. Bill?
Thank you, Molly. Molly Line watching that. Next hour, former Secretary of Education, Dr. Bill Bennett, is our headliner. We'll put some questions to him coming up in our 10 a.m. Eastern Time hour. Thank you.
Back to another top story this morning. We're waiting to learn Paul Manafort's fate, his sentencing on federal conspiracy charges in Washington expected this morning as new transcripts come to light, renewing questions about the FBI and DOJ's handling of the Clinton email investigation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge following all these stories for us. Catherine, good morning.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Good morning. This is the second and final sentence for the former Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and it brings to an end the most public and high-profile prosecution that was brought by special counsel Robert Mueller and his team. The issue for the federal judge Amy Jackson Berman today is whether the sentence here in Washington will run back-to-back with the 47 months that Manafort got in Virginia last week for bank and tax fraud convictions, or whether it will run simultaneously. The max they're looking at here in Washington, D.C. is a decade, and in a pre-sentencing memo, the special counsel pressed for something very serious. Quote, Manafort chose repeatedly and knowingly to violate the law, whether the laws prescribed garden variety crimes such as tax fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and bank fraud, or more esoteric laws that he nevertheless was intimately familiar with, such as the Foreign Agents Registration Act. His criminal actions were bold, some of which were committed while under a spotlight due to his work as the campaign chairman and later while he was on bail from this court. Manafort's legal team has always maintained that he was the subject of prosecutorial overreach and that these crimes had nothing to do with this underlying question of Russian collusion. Here's lawyer Kevin Downing.
Most importantly, what you saw today is the same thing that we had said from day one. There is absolutely no evidence that Paul Manafort was involved with any collusion with any government official from Russia.
And the thing to watch today is whether the special counsel will also press the judge so that Manafort will give up his remaining fortune of $11 million because he violated a plea agreement to fully cooperate with that investigation, Sandra.
Now, Catherine, what are you learning about who told the FBI and the FBI lawyers to stand down on the Hillary Clinton email investigation? What is the latest on that?
Well, at the heart of this breaking news this morning, Sandra, is something called 18 U.S.C. 793 subsection F. And what we showed through our ongoing reporting at Fox News is that this is the gross negligence statute that most applied to Hillary Clinton and her use of an unsecured personal server as Secretary of State. What we learned this morning is that Lisa Page, when she testified under oath last fall, she shed new light on whether there was advice from the Justice Department under the Obama administration not to pursue this gross negligence statute. We have a tweet from Congressman John Radcliffe, a Republican. He led that line of questioning with Lisa Page, and he says that Page testified that there was advice from the Obama administration's Justice Department that this statute was too vague and that it was not sustainable and that it should not be proceeded upon. And we've also had a tweet from the president this morning reacting to this news, saying he believes this is evidence that the Obama administration Justice Department was a broken and corrupt machine. What's important here when we think about the gross negligence statute, Sandra, is that it did not have that requirement for intent, and it was FBI Director Comey who said consistently he wanted to find intent in order to pursue any prosecution of Hillary Clinton and her team, Sandra.
A lot to take in there. Catherine Herridge, thank you.
I want to bring in Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy, serves on the Judiciary Committee. Senator, good morning to you. You're listening to that report. I'm going to play for you a moment, July of 2016. Here's James Comey when he ran the FBI. Watch you.
I know there will be intense public debate in the wake of this recommendation, as there was throughout the investigation. What I can assure the American people is that this investigation was done honestly, competently, and independently. No outside influence of any kind was brought to bear.
Now we have the indication that DOJ perhaps said take a knee on this one, Senator. What's the truth in this?
I don't know, Bill, but we better find out. I mean, this is just disgusting. 99% of the men and women at the FBI and at Justice are good people, but you've got a small minority over there, or you did, maybe you still do. Most of them appear to be anti-Trump, though I'm sure there's some that are anti-Clinton, but they want to act on their political beliefs. And then they want to go out and sell books. I listened to Andy McCabe on Sunday. You know, he acts like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. This guy is trying to sell a book. Everybody forgets he was fired for lying to the FBI and getting involved in politics. And now this with Lisa Page. Look, these people have hurt badly the premier law enforcement agency in all of human history. And we're going to have to work really hard to build back the reputation of the FBI. Because it is a well-deserved good reputation for most of the agents there.
Is it your sense that Bob Mueller's trying to wrestle with this, quite literally?
I hope so. And if he doesn't, I hope that Chairman Graham, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, will. We've got to lance this boil. Now, it's okay to have political beliefs. This is America. But if you work for the FBI or the Justice Department, you cannot act on them. And at the root of this problem, you have a select group of people over there who think they're smarter and more virtuous than ordinary Americans, and that ordinary Americans aren't smart enough to choose for themselves. So these people over at the FBI, the small group, have to put their thumb on the scale and guide the American people to make the correct choice. Give me a break. Yeah. The arrogance.
Well, we're going to see Paul Manafort in court here in a moment. What do you think this week is going to reveal? There's a lot of action on the legal front, Senator. What is your sense of that?
Well, I don't have any sympathy for Mr. Manafort. He's pleaded guilty. Well, no, he was convicted of bank fraud and tax fraud. Now, there was no evidence of any collusion with Russia or any of that, but bank fraud and tax fraud are serious offenses against the American people. And he's always played on the margins, and I think I've called him a sleazoid, and he is. So I don't have any sympathy for him.
Last point here on this resolution, emergency declaration on behalf of the president. You came out with a kind of a surprising comment yesterday. You said you thought the president was going to lose before, and now you're not so sure. What changed?
I'm not sure. There are a handful of Republicans who want to support the president, and they believe in border security, but they believe that the National Emergencies Act is unconstitutional. And my point is, okay, you may be right. But in the meantime, the president is not using any power that he doesn't have. And you know why he has it? Because Congress gave it to him. Now, maybe Congress shouldn't have, but the cow is out the barn. And that's why I think that what the president's doing is well within his power. I'm going to vote to support him, and I think he'll win in court. In the meantime, if we want to reform the National Emergencies Act, I like to think the president would join with us and try to improve it. And that may be a way to get more Republicans on board. I'm not predicting it'll happen, but I'm more optimistic today than I was yesterday.
Interesting to follow. Senator, good to have you back. Like butter in your mouth, right? Okay? That's the line of the morning so far, until that is topped. Thank you, Senator, for your time.
Now to these breaking new details on the Boeing investigation. Black boxes from the latest crash being sent overseas as new reports reveal U.S. pilots complained anonymously about issues with the same Boeing MAX jet in recent months. The details on that ahead.
So Nancy Pelosi definitely wants to impeach the president. They just want to find more evidence. So she's staking out a position that ultimately I think she will come around if they do in fact find their mythical animal that they're looking for on collusion.
So there it is. Congressman Devin Nunes saying he thinks Nancy Pelosi will still try and impeach the president. We'll ask the freshman Democrat, Congressman Harley Root, about where he stands on that issue, and a lot more coming up here. Sandra?
And former aides to Ronald Reagan wanting to set the record straight after Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez suggested the former president was a racist. We'll speak to one of them in a bit.
I would challenge all of you to pledge yourselves to building an America where incidents of racial hatred do not happen because racism has been banned not just from the law books, but from the hearts of the people.
On the topic of impeachment, I think we have to be clear that that is not the end goal of this caucus.
Speaker Pelosi and all members of leadership have always encouraged us to represent our district. And it means we're beginning the process to look at some of these alleged claims that he's impeachable offenses.
I don't think she said now's not the time to call for impeachment. She said she didn't want to move forward right now with impeachment.
Oh, some Democrats now pushing back on this talk about impeaching the president after Speaker Pelosi made headlines opposing it. California Democratic Congressman Harley Root sits on the House Oversight Committee. He's a freshman in Congress. And, sir, thank you for being here today. Appreciate your time. What do you think about, do you favor this move on impeachment or not, sir?
I've said all along we need to give Mueller and the other investigations the time to do the breadth and depth they deserve, just like you wouldn't do an investigation and halfway through file charges. You want to get all the way through and see if you have actionable items, and that's what we need to do here.
That sounds fair. Here's the headline for the New York Times, one of them. Here it is. If not Trump, then who? Pelosi fuels impeachment debate with long implications. You saw that story. What'd you think of that?
Well, I think the question there is what's right and what's wrong. And I used to be a Republican, and this should not be a Republican or Democrat question. This should be a question of right or wrong. And if the president has committed wrongs that rise to the level of impeachable offenses, then I hope all members of Congress would do their constitutional duty.
You say you used to be? What happened?
Yes. I left in 1997.
Some time ago then. Then you moved to California. Did you hear what Steny Hoyer said the other day? He said there's 62 new members of Congress, of which you're one, and only 3 seem to get all the attention. You agree with that?
I do. I think there's too much focus on the extremes of both parties, and I was elected by the voters of Orange County because I brought a pragmatic message that we have more in common than what separates us. So I came here to legislate, and I'm hoping to work with members of both parties to do just that.
Well, what do you think about those who get all those headlines all the time? Because, I mean, if you've got a moderate message, you're not getting any oxygen, are you?
Well, actually, we are getting that message out, and it's very clear that the Democratic caucus is moved to the center. The reason we got the majority was because of folks like me who turned districts from red to blue on that type of message. And I'm hopeful that the media will continue to focus on those opportunities on where we can work together.
A lot of red in your district. You'd admit that, right? I mean, it's pretty much 50-50 there in Orange County, correct?
Exactly, yes.
If that's the case, why don't you bend Tom Perez's ear, head of the DNC? I mean, who's really afraid of Chris Wallace for a debate during the primary season, huh?
Well, that's above my pay grade.
Well, what do you think about that? Would you go ahead and invite, if you were given an invitation to come on and have a debate on our network, would you take it, sir?
Oh, absolutely. I would welcome the opportunity. I just want to make sure.
Why are they afraid of that then, it would appear?
You'd have to ask them. I really don't know what the decision-making process was. I wasn't in the room when that decision was made and really haven't spent any time because, honestly, that's not what I'm focused on. I'm focused on doing my job.
Think there's a chance we can revisit that?
Possibly. I think that's going to be between Fox and the DNC.
Hope so. Put in a word for us, okay?
You bet.
Harley Rudy, you come on back. Freshman Democrat from California.
Thanks a lot.
Sir. Thank you for your time.
On to this. Police in California arresting an illegal immigrant in the murder of a San Jose woman. What ICE is saying about the suspect's record and why this crime was preventable. We're going to have the details on this next.
A terrifying scene from overseas Nigeria. A 3-story school building collapses while the classes were in session. This is the aftermath now. Rescue teams racing to find children thought to be trapped possibly underneath the rubble. Building collapses are said to be common in that part of Africa due to a lack of regulatory oversight of a lot of new construction in Nigeria.
One of the important crises we faced was racial discrimination. The man whose words and deeds in that crisis stirred our nation to the very depths of its soul was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Let us not only recall Dr. King, but rededicate ourselves to the commandments he believed in and sought to live every day.
Well, that was President Ronald Reagan in November 1983 at the signing of a bill to make Martin Luther King Day a national holiday. The 40th president back in the news this week after Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez implied that many of the policies implemented under Reagan were rooted in racism.
A perfect example of how special interests and the powerful have pitted white working class Americans against brown and black working class Americans in order to just screw over all working class Americans is Reaganism in the 80s.
Mark Weinberg is a former aide to President Reagan and the author of Movie Nights with the Reagans. Mark, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, you're very passionate about this. This is a man you spent a lot of time with. And you were actually in the room on several occasions where the president saw or heard of someone calling him a racist. How would he react?
He would be angry. I knew this man well for a really long time, and I can tell you he did not have a racist bone in his body. And it's unfortunate that this representative in Congress is spending her time perpetuating old myths and telling lies instead of serving her constituents.
I know in your piece you said that if she had bothered to do her homework, she would have found otherwise. What would she have found? What about his policies, can you tell us, benefited all Americans?
Well, she would found out that the economic growth during the Reagan administration caused employment to rise for all segments of our society, African American and Hispanics among them. She would have found out that Ronald Reagan was the first president to appoint an African American national security advisor, the first president to appoint a Hispanic to the cabinet. She would have found out that he was raised from the time he was a little boy to treat people on the basis of who they were, not what color they were, and that when he was a football player in college, he took 2 black players to sleep in his home because the hotel that the team was staying at wouldn't let African Americans stay there. That's what she would have found out.
As a close observer of politics, what do you think? Why do you think she went there on that stage over the weekend?
Because it generates publicity. There are a lot of problems in the country that should have her attention. There are airplanes falling out of the sky. There are people cheating their ways into college. There are a lot of things going on. And this congresswoman should represent her constituents and quit telling lies, 30-year-old lies, about a former president.
Let's get to a bit here from your op-ed. You write this, quote, Ocasio-Cortez is entitled to advocate for whatever position she wishes, no matter how antithetical they may be to American values and our way of life. That is the beauty, you write, of our system. But she is not entitled to lie. No one in public office is. She owes Ronald Reagan and the public an apology.
She sure does, especially her constituents. They sent her to Washington to represent their interests, not to generate publicity for herself by taking cheap and dishonest shots. She should do her job.
You know, you look back at the economy during the days of Reagan and how his policies really created an economic boom, and we look at that growth today, and we can only wish for some of the numbers that we saw as far as economic growth during those years.
That's exactly right, and the economic growth during the Reagan administration benefited all segments of society.
Fascinating to look back at that. You know, just broadly speaking, before we let you go, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said these things on the stage over the weekend. There is a lot of things being thrown out there, and this is a time where we can look back at history and learn. Final thoughts from you.
Final thoughts are we should get it right, that Ronald Reagan, as I said earlier, was a man who didn't have a racist bone in his body. He came to Washington to do his best for all people, and members of Congress should do their jobs.
Well, you're certainly out there to set the record straight. I know you wrote this piece with your colleague Craig Shirley.
I did.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Bill?
28 past, watching the courtroom in Washington, D.C. A second sentencing hearing about to get underway for the former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort begins in moments. We're told he entered the courtroom a moment ago in a wheelchair, wearing a suit and tie. Manafort arrived, and we'll bring you the latest from inside. And do you remember this? Have a look here.
I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material.
Hillary Clinton denying any misuse of a private email account while she was Secretary of State. But newly released transcripts now asking one big question. Did the Justice Department shut down the FBI?
Also, 2 actresses, now the faces of the largest college admissions cheating scandal in history. We'll dig into all this with the former U.S. Attorney, Andy McCarthy, who's on deck next live.
Paul Manafort's second sentencing hearing expected to get underway at any moment. Now, a live look at the courthouse there. We're hearing the judge has entered the room. Paul Manafort is there as well. Let's bring in Andy McCarthy, former U.S. Assistant Attorney and Fox News contributor, to set this up for us. Andy, good morning. What should we expect this morning?
Well, I think that what you'll see is probably a sentence in the neighborhood of about 20 years. That's pretty much what you're looking at, given the guidelines that are involved for the kind of financial fraud crimes, particularly money laundering, that's involved. The judge will have an option to run whatever sentence she imposes concurrent or consecutive to the sentence that was imposed last week. I've always said, Sandra, that this was really supposed to be one big prosecution. It was Manafort who elected to try the tax cases in a different jurisdiction, which he was entitled to. But this is really one big case, and we won't be able to evaluate what the real sentence is until the end of today when we see the one bottom line result. And whether it's concurrent or consecutive, I think it'll be around 20 years.
Okay, and he's about to turn 70 years old. So I know you have said this is we're looking at basically a life sentence for Paul Manafort. His family and friends have begged for leniency. A little bit about this judge, Amy Berman Jackson. She can give him a maximum of 10 years, which you just laid out. Why is she expected to be harsher than the last judge?
Well, it's not really, Sandra, I don't think it's so much a question of being harsher. Manafort signed a plea agreement when he pled guilty in the District of Columbia, which called for a sentence within the federal sentencing guidelines of 210 to 262 months. That's about 18 to 22 years. And that was contingent on his accepting responsibility by pleading guilty and cooperating with the federal prosecutors. Since then, what they say is that he lied to them, they broke his cooperation agreement, and they don't even have to stand behind the adjustment for accepting responsibility, which could zoom his guidelines up to as much as about 320 months. So a lot of this it's not so much a function of this judge being harsh. That's what the sentencing guidelines are, and that's the plea agreement that he agreed to when he pled guilty.
What is the significance of his sentencing and the implications of it?
Well, to my mind, the significance is really the substance of the prosecution more than the sentence that Manafort gets. The sentence that Manafort gets is obviously extremely important to him. I think as far as the country is concerned, the importance is that the prosecution, after 2 years of really going pretty hard at this guy, was unable to come up with anything in the nature of a link between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. And what I continue to point out to people is at the end of the day, after all of this, what Mueller convicted Manafort of was being an agent of Ukraine. He never alleged that he was an agent of Russia, and the two things simply aren't the same.
Some of what we've heard heading into this, prosecutors in the case, in the filing, said that his sentencing should reflect the gravity of his conduct. They wrote, his defense team, however, argues that he should be sentenced in a term of imprisonment significantly below the statutory maximum. Actually, in their words, Andy, they said this case is not about murder, drug cartels, organized crime, the Madoff Ponzi scheme of the collapse of Enron. So to what degree do you think that the judge will take in those words and the fact that he has had family members, his wife has written letters calling him the rock of the family, they've relied on him for years. How much will all of this play a part in the sentencing that we are about to see?
Well, it'll play somewhat of a part. Sandra, to talk about sentencing below the statutory maximums is almost nonsensical in this context, because the statutory maximums here are in the hundreds of years. What I've been talking about is the sentencing guidelines, which is the sort of realistic framework within which he'll be sentenced. As far as all of the pleas made for the defendant on behalf of the family members, that's something that federal judges and all judges hear in every single case. I can tell you, after 20 years of being a prosecutor, sentencing is the hardest thing for a judge. It's an unpleasant thing for even the prosecutors most of the time who push for people to be sentenced. It's a difficult thing, but at the same time, he's got to be sentenced with something that approximates what people who have multi-million-dollar fraud and money laundering convictions across the country are sentenced to. That's why the guidelines are in effect, and that's why I expect it'll be around 20 years.
All right, what we're told right now is the judge is explaining the counts. So we are going to get this, this news will trickle out of the courtroom. As we get it, we'll bring it to our audience. We know that the special counsel, Andrew Weissman's in the room. Manafort's team is in the room, including Kevin Downing, Richard Westling. He was wheeled into the courtroom in a wheelchair wearing a suit. We're getting this news as it comes in. We will bring that to everybody. Andy McCarthy, I know you're going to stick around for us on this breaking news. And when we get this sentencing, we will certainly bring it to everyone. Andy, thank you.
Illegal immigrant arrested for murder in California and by the name of Carlos Carranza, suspected of fatally stabbing a woman about a month ago. Authorities saying that he has a long criminal record with multiple ICE detainer requests that went unanswered. Jonathan Hunt picks up the story live in L.A. on that with details today. Jonathan?
Bill, 59-year-old Bambi Larson was in her home alone with her dog and cat on the night of February 28th when Carlos Eduardo Arevalo Carranza broke in and then stabbed and beat Larson to death. Carranza was arrested Monday night. He is in the country illegally. He had been detained by the Department of Homeland Security near McAllen, Texas in 2013, and at that time was deported, but he came back to the U.S. and since 2015 has racked up a string of convictions, including for burglary, battery, and drug offenses. At least 6 times, according to the San Jose police chief, Immigration and Customs Enforcement had placed detainers on Carranza, meaning a request to hold him in jail longer so he could be questioned by immigration officers. But according to the chief, those detainers were not honored because of California's so-called sanctuary laws.
Those undocumented residents who are not violent or serious criminals should not fear the police. But when we have violent or serious offenders that are preying on our community, we must have the ability to protect our residents.
The president of the San Jose Police Officers Association was even more outspoken, saying in a statement, quote, "If you are an undocumented violent criminal, you do not deserve any legal protection that allows you to continue breaking laws and harming women, police officers, and others. There is no moral justification to protect someone this vile from serving their jail time and being deported. We must work to fix these laws now so that public safety officers can protect everyone who lives in our communities regardless of their immigration status." And acting ICE Field Director Eric Bonner said, quote, "How many more people have to be killed or injured before California lawmakers will open discussions to revise the state policy prohibiting local law enforcement agencies from working with ICE to apprehend dangerous criminal aliens?" Bambi Larson didn't talk much about politics, according to her friends, although she is now at the center of this political debate. Bill, friends said Larson was just, quote, "sweet, beautiful, a friend to everyone, always smiling."
Wow.
Bill?
What a memory. Thank you, Jonathan Hunt, on that story from Los Angeles today. Thank you, sir.
An NFL trade sending shockwaves through the Big Apple. The New York Giants trading superstar wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. to the Cleveland Browns for a first and third round draft pick. Beckham recently signed a massive contract extension with the Giants, their GM saying at the time they didn't resign him to trade him. Bill Hemmer has something to say about that.
It's a big move. Browns are beefing it up. I mean, they think that maybe Cleveland's turning the corner after so many years in the NFL world.
You think?
He's not the only big trade. There's a lot of movement right now with really key star players that are moving teams. So it's going to be really interesting come the offseason.
I like it.
So,
all right.
Off to Cleveland we go. Off to Boeing we go, too. Fallout continues now after the deadly plane crash in Ethiopia. What we are now learning from the cockpit voice recorder as the president weighs in on that. Plus, have a listen here. Joe Biden's back.
I appreciate the energy you showed when I got up here. Save it a little longer. I may need it in a few weeks.
Well, Joe Biden dropping a big hint at a big rally yesterday. So what would that mean to an already crowded Democratic field? Our A team will be here to discuss all of that.
2 tragic accidents in such a short period of time suggests that we should take a close look. That, I'm sure, is being done, but out of an abundance of safety concerns and common sense, I think it makes sense to ground the aircraft until we have better information.
We have heard from several lawmakers. Senator Mitt Romney, they're urging the government to ground that Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet amid reports that American pilots also had problems with the plane. Sal Lagonia is an aviation attorney back with us in studio. And Sal, it's been some time. I think that's good news.
Well, that is good news, right?
While. Biggest war, I think, headline of the morning is that the black boxes from Ethiopia will be flown to Europe. What do you think of?
Not a problem. NTSB is on the ground there. Excuse me, and so they're probably involved in that decision to send it to the nearest place. I think what they're trying to do is get as much data as they can early.
All right. FAA put out several statements. Here's just one of them. The FAA continues to review extensively all available data and aggregate safety performance from operators and pilots of Boeing 737 MAX. Thus far, our review shows no systematic performance issues and provides no basis to order grounding the aircraft, nor have other civil aviation authorities provided data to us that would warrant such action. Yesterday, they talked about the home market, suggesting in each individual country they have to make the decision they feel is best. What do you think of that judgment?
I think the FAA and the NTSB certainly know more than we do right now. They're not releasing anything yet, but they know more than we do. And their focus is no longer on the aircraft as much as it is maybe on other outside factors, including crew training. We've had this aircraft flying in the United States for a few years now. We've had reports of a few little incidents with it, but the pilots in every event were able to overcome them by circumventing the system. There's a non-normal checklist that they go through, and they do that.
So on this website where these pilots can file anonymous complaints or issues, apparently there were complaints about this.
Right.
How significant do you think that is?
And they're not necessarily complaints. The ASRS, which is the system we're talking about, is run by NASA. And it's an avenue whereby pilots can give their input into anything that was unusual in a flight and what they did to prevent anything bad from happening. That's all we've seen. We've seen 2 of those reports over the period of the couple of years that this aircraft has been in service. And that, for us, tells us that there really hasn't been that big of a problem because no one else has thought to report anything similar.
Okay, I see Dallas Morning News did a report. Did you see that?
I did.
That's from where these comments came from. What they describe, and I think you'll well understand this, if the plane loses lift under its wings during takeoff, the nose begins to point upward.
Correct.
And the inclination for a pilot is to reverse that movement.
Right.
But the system is built to do it itself.
Correct.
So if the system is doing it and the pilot is doing it, you have 2x on the movement down toward
Correct.
Earth.
What we've done, and this is apropos to some of the tweets we've seen from the president even, that what we've done is we've taken a lot of the control out of the pilot's hands at some point in flying these days, and given it to a machine. And when the machine reacts the way it does and the pilot doesn't understand it, you have a conflict. And so very often what you have to do is simply take that system out of loop. And that's what a pilot should be trained to do. They should be trained to quickly disengage that automatic system.
But conversely, if you're Boeing and you're not sure all these pilots flying all these planes in all countries around the world have done the proper training,
and therein lies the rub.
Do you err on the side of caution or not, Sam?
Well, therein lies the rub. Boeing offers training for what's called transition training to each type of aircraft. They did sell this airplane as not necessarily needing a great deal of extra training. But some of these smaller airlines and some of these other countries don't take advantage of that, and they don't necessarily transition their pilots onto the next step. This system in this aircraft is not so much different than the NG systems, which have been flying for many, many years, most popular aircraft there is.
Hope we don't have to talk for a long time.
I do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal, for being here today.
As we know, right now in court, Paul Manafort, the president's former campaign manager, is awaiting a second sentencing in Washington, D.C. A live look at the courthouse there. Judge Jackson's going over the sentencing guidelines, we are being told. This is the latest from inside. There are arguments about whether or not he was the leader of a conspiracy. That would add more potential time, and whether or not he has accepted responsibility for his crimes, which could mean less time. She has reiterated, by the way, that the most he can get today is 10 years. But no clarity on that yet. We are awaiting that. We will have more on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Major blow to Prime Minister Theresa May, defeating her second Brexit plan last night. But a big vote today could be a new test for British lawmakers 16 days before the UK is set to leave the European Union. Benjamin Hall's live from London with the latest on all of this. Benjamin, good morning.
Yeah, hi, Sandra. This really is another heavy defeat for Theresa May and for her Brexit deal, which many people now say is dead in the water. But it has major implications, not just for the UK, but also for the US and the relationship between the two countries. As you say, May lost that vote yesterday by 149 votes, a major rejection, and it leaves the country now in chaos, with Europe shaking its head, asking what exactly the UK wants. Well, after that defeat, May offered Parliament options moving forward.
Does it want to hold a second referendum? Or Does it want to leave with a deal, but not this deal? These are unenviable choices.
The first option on which they will vote today is whether or not to accept a no-deal Brexit. That would mean a clean break just 16 days from now with no divorce agreements in place. Some say that would be an economic disaster, though others are cheering it, saying a no-deal Brexit would bring the US and the UK a lot closer, allowing a wide-ranging free trade deal between the two countries, which could potentially offer low-tariff access to the British market, to US liquid natural gas, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and so much more. That's because at the moment the UK rules and regulations are governed by EU, and if they were to pull out, they could openly trade with the US and many other countries. President Trump has championed that kind of a deal. We wait to see later today whether or not the UK Parliament approves of it.
It has been really something to watch. Benjamin Hall, thank you.
At this hour, Paul Manafort's back before a judge. Second sentencing in 1 week, happening right now. Judge just saying a moment ago that she still finds that the former campaign chair did, in fact, give false testimony. Britt Hume is going to join us for some reaction on that coming up. Also, the actress